All right. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Angela Fobbs, and I'm a Democrat abroad in Germany. I am so happy to be here with our Iowa candidates and our Iowa members to talk about the great races and elections they're running. But I do want to remind everyone that if you have not received an absentee ballot, or if you have not requested your absentee ballot, that there is still time. You can go to votefromabroad.org. It takes about 5 minutes. And be sure to vote because this is an extremely important election. And I think I read somewhere that some race in Iowa was only lost by the Democrat by 6 votes.
True.
So that we can't let that happen again. We got to win. So please vote. And if you're in the United States and you happen to see this, go to iwillvote.com and register to vote or verify that you're actually registered for the election on November 8th. I'd like to introduce June Owens. She is the vice chair of the Iowa Democratic Party. And who'd like to say a few words about the state of the race, particularly on the Senate race, where Michael Franken, a former Navy admiral, is running a strong campaign against Chuck Grassley. Oh, thank goodness. She will also remind voters to vote for Deirdre DeGier, who is running in the governor's race against the Republican incumbent, Kim Reynolds. Yes, let's get rid of all these Republicans. So I'll turn it over to you, June.
Thank you so much, Angela, and thank you, Democrats abroad. I'm so pleased to be speaking with you all today. The support of our Democrats abroad community means the world to us here in Iowa. Believe it or not, Iowa is a purple state, and our races are highly competitive. In 2020, one of our congressional seats was lost by only 6 votes. That's why it's critical for every Iowan, stateside or overseas, to cast their vote in every race up and down the ticket. We have 3 of the tightest congressional races in the country this cycle, and we're so thrilled to have all of our House candidates here with us or represented today on this call. But before we hear from them or their designee, let me give you a brief rundown. Right now, Liz Mathis is in Iowa 2. She's in neck and neck competition with her opponent, Ashley Hinson, who runs like a moderate, but governs like an extremist. Hinson has broken many of her campaign promises, and it's clear that she's putting her own chances of becoming a Fox News contributor ahead of her real needs of working families. Liz Mathis spent decades telling important stories that held powerful interests accountable as a news anchor. This led her to a nonprofit work and then to the Iowa Senate. I know she will do great things in the United States Congress as well. The race in Iowa 1 has incredible potential. In 2020, the Democrats lost this by only 6 votes, making it one of the closest congressional races ever, and showed all of us how important it is to vote in every election. Democrat and state representative Christina Bohannon, the daughter of a daycare worker and a construction worker who never finished high school, grew up in a trailer in a rural small town. Now an engineer and law professor, she is a great example of the heights we can reach when our government works for working people. She is running to make sure that every family has access to the safety nets that protected her family. You all know Cindy Axne. President Joe Biden even said that there was nothing that could keep Cindy from helping Iowans. She has the most contested race in the country, with her new district leaning Republican. But her opponent, Zach Nunn, continues to flip-flop on his positions, especially on wanting an outright ban on abortion. Cindy has worked hard for Iowa, and now we are working hard to keep her in office. Northwest Iowa has been historically challenging for Democrats, but that doesn't mean that we can just give up. Ryan Melton stepped up when no one else did and is doing an incredible job energizing local Democrats. Randy Feenstra, a quiet but extreme Republican, voted against protecting gay and interracial marriage, voted against birth control access and has never once broken with the Republican caucus. Ryan is not only spreading the word about what we stand for, but is also empowering Democrats to run for local office, building our bench for the future. Our House seats aren't the only neck and neck races. A new poll showed this week shows that Admiral Mike Franken within 4 points of Chuck Grassley, the closest of any opponent Grassley has faced. President Biden has a 50-50 Senate on a good day, and it'll take an Iowa Democratic senator to pass legislation that has meaningful impacts for the American people. And while you may not hear a lot of national news on our state races are just as important. The fight for public education, common sense gun safety reform, reproductive freedom lies with the states. We need strong Democratic governors to stand up to the right-wing extremists trying to take away our rights. Deidre DeGier is ready to be that governor and to stand up for Iowans. She has the opportunity to be the first Black woman governor in the United States, and I'm very excited to cast my vote for her. Even if it doesn't make international news, Iowa is a battleground. We want to make sure every Iowan casts their vote, and I'm so glad that Democrats abroad are alongside us with this. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, June. Every state is a battleground. I totally agree. And we gotta win. Now I'd like to give the floor to Professor Jane Singer, a DA UK member and an Iowa 1 voter. Jane?
Thank you so much, Angela. I'm Jane Singer. I'm at City University of London, formerly at the University of Iowa. So I'm just delighted to welcome my former Iowa colleague, Christina Bohannon. Thank you so much for being here. You just heard a little bit about her from June. I'd probably say some of the same things and then turn it over to Christina. So Professor Bohannon currently serves as a member of the Iowa House. She's represented the 81st district for the 85th district, sorry, Christina, for the past year. Growing up in Florida, first in her family to graduate college, has degrees both in engineering and law school, worked her way through school at the University of Florida, doing everything from picking oranges to cleaning trailers. Managed to find time to be editor-in-chief of her law review, graduated first in her class from University of Florida Law School, and clerked, or Clarked, as we say here in the UK, for the US Court of Appeals in the 11th District, then became an environmental engineer in Florida. So you're getting the impression that, which is correct, that she's an amazing woman. Moved to Iowa in 2000, became a professor of law at the University of Iowa College of Law, very excellent and prestigious law school, focusing on constitutional law, torts, and intellectual property. Also served us wonderfully at Iowa as president of our faculty senate, so she is no stranger to challenging politics. And we're delighted you're here, Christina. Thank you so much for joining us with Democrats Abroad.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm really happy to see everybody, and really happy to hear from a former colleague at the University of Iowa who's now abroad doing great things, I'm sure. So hello, everyone. I'm Christina Bohannon. As I said, I'm a law professor at the University of Iowa. I've been here for about 23 years. And before that, I was an environmental engineer. I worked on water quality issues at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Water quality is a big issue in Iowa, as it is in many places in the country and in the world. And obviously, climate change is a big issue as well, and that's something that I'm very interested in too. So thank you all. You know, I'll just say a little bit, and there are a number of challenges facing us in this race, and there's a lot at stake on the ballot here. You know, we know that our democracy is absolutely on the ballot. We know that women's rights and, you know, the right to privacy, the right freedom, the right to control one's own body are absolutely on the ballot in this election. And basically the right of working people to get by and to get ahead are on the ballot. You know, I've been traveling all over Southeast Iowa. I love it. It's been great. I've met so many great people But, you know, what I see is that people love Iowa. They want to live here and have kids here, retire here. But it's challenging. It's really hard. A lot of people are working really hard, but they're not getting a fair shot. I talked to a woman a while back who has worked at a plant, devoted her life to this company for 12 years, loves her job, but she's a single mom with 4 kids, and she doesn't get a single day of sick leave a year. I talked to others who are really struggling, seniors who are struggling to get by with their Social Security and Medicare at a time when inflation is really high. Down in Keokuk in the southern part of my district, they just found out that their hospital's closing. Maybe they might not even have an emergency room before too long where they can go when things get really bad. And so, these are real issues. And what we see is that rather than dealing with those problems, we have elected officials who are aligning with the extreme members of their party, who are taking extraordinary amounts of money from corporate special interests. My opponent, for example, has taken tens of thousands of dollars from the oil and gas industry and then refused to hold them accountable for price gouging, even as gas prices soared and Iowans suffered. She also has taken a lot of money from the pharmaceutical industry and then voted against letting Medicare negotiate for lower drug prices, against capping the price of insulin for seniors, against capping out-of-pocket costs for Medicare, and has supported privatizing Social Security and raising the retirement age. So these are all things that affect ordinary day-to-day working people and or our retirees who earned their benefits. And what we see is just over and over again aligning with the extreme members of her party and with corporate special interests. The other thing I'll say is that she has taken a very extreme position against abortion. She co-sponsored a bill in Congress called a Life at Conception bill that would ban all abortions across the country, coast to coast, no exceptions for rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother, starting at the moment of conception. And what that means is no choice for women whatsoever. And it also means real health risks. That bill would prevent a physician from terminating an ectopic pregnancy. Ectopic pregnancies can, by definition, never become a viable child, a viable fetus, a viable baby, and it puts the life of the mother in severe risk. And so, it would even ban in vitro fertilization. You couldn't do in vitro fertilization for people who desperately want to have children under a bill like the one that my opponent has proposed. And then after doing that, she turned right around and voted against guaranteeing contraception, guaranteeing a right of contraception. And so it means that, do we want to stop unwanted pregnancies or don't we? This makes no sense. This is such an extreme position to say that women can't choose for themselves what kind of birth control they take. I mean, this is putting our country back 100 years, and we need to move forward. We need to allow women to be equal citizens in this country and to be able to control their own bodies, to protect their privacy, their families, to make decisions for themselves about these really critical issues. So this is what's on the ballot in this election. And just fundamentally, we need someone who is going to vote for Iowans, who is going to serve Iowans. Over and over and over, we see her voting against every single thing that would make Iowans' lives better. She voted against an infrastructure bill that would fix our roads and bridges that we desperately need here in Iowa, and that would also create great jobs here in Iowa. She voted against bringing good manufacturing jobs back to places like Iowa. And, she even voted against health care for our veterans. She said, she went to the floor of the US House and she said that it's wasteful spending to give our veterans health care after for illnesses they got after being exposed to toxic burn pits in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. She called that wasteful spending. I would say if we can spend hundreds of billions of dollars to send our troops into harm's way around the world, we can spend a fraction of that to take care of them when they get home. So that's what I'm about. I am all about fighting for Iowa. I want to help protect working people. That is how I grew up. You know, as somebody said, I grew up in a trailer off of a dirt road in a really small town. You know, neither of my parents graduated high school. And, you know, it was only because of the power of things like public education, because I had a fair shot when my family had access to Social Security and Medicare. It was only because college tuition was affordable and because I got a fair shot that I was able to go on and enjoy opportunities that I never could have imagined as a kid. And so I am fighting to make sure that all of those opportunities are available for our next generation, and that they too will get a fair shot for a bright future. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Christina. We're going to take questions now. If anyone has a question in the audience, please type * hand up in the chat and we'll put you in the queue. Our first question is from Naomi Aegis. She's the vice chair of the DA Global Women's Caucus and a member of DA Norway.
Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And you addressed, I think, some of the answer to this question in your remarks. So I will give you the opportunity to add anything you want, but don't feel like you didn't get your very, very strong point across. So we know that abortion is a winning issue for Democrats. We want our candidates to run and win on protecting it and protecting women's rights. So we're wondering what lessons you're taking from the recent victory in Kansas to show, and how to show it has the impact on Iowans, just like everywhere else in the country. And then the second part of the question is, how can Democrats abroad help get the word out to voters motivated by this issue, and to reach voters who might not typically support Democrats? How do we use this moment to teach and reach them about this issue?
Absolutely. Yes, that builds on what I said before. So thank you very much. So this is a really, really key question, because we know that ordinary people are with us. Okay, we know that everyday people supported Roe versus Wade. I think so many people were completely taken aback and shocked when the Supreme Court suddenly, overturned it this summer, after many of the justices said in their Senate confirmation hearings that they would protect that precedent. And so we know that people were really shocked. We saw in Kansas that people are on our side on this issue, that they want women to have equal rights in our society. They want women to have equal control over their bodies, and they want to protect the right to choose. Here's the challenge, and your question really kind of alluded to this. The challenge is that in Kansas, the issue was directly on the ballot. It was written out on the ballot. Do you want to support, do you want to ban abortion? Do you want to protect the right to choose? And here in this election, it's not written out on the ballot. We're talking about candidates now who are on the ballot. So the challenge for us is to get the word out and the message across about the extreme positions that these candidates are taking, because just as many people were shocked and surprised when the Supreme Court overruled Roe versus Wade, they also would be shocked and surprised to know the extreme positions that many of these Republican candidates are taking on this issue. Many, many people do not know that Marionette Miller Meeks co-sponsored a life at conception bill to ban abortion coast to coast with no exceptions whatsoever, starting at the moment of conception. That is an extreme position that Iowans do not share. And so our goal, our job, our work in this election is to educate people on that very, very dangerous position that will absolutely put women's lives at risk. And so that is what we have to do. So anything that you can do to spread that word, to make that known, that's the work I will do in this campaign. And that is the work I would ask you to do, as you were thinking about this election and trying to get involved.
All right, our next question is from Carol Moore from DA UK, and she is one of our leading figures in Democrats Abroad. Oh.
Well, thank you, Angela. But one thing I do, Christina, is organize events like this. And thank you so much for joining us and really talking directly to our members around the world, both today in person, and we will be circulating the video, of course. Now, my question is something that impacts Americans abroad. It is tax. And many, you may know, most Americans are not aware that the United States is the only, excuse me, the only developed country in the world that requires its overseas citizens to file a tax return at home every year. This means that we have to file 2 tax returns. We have to file one in the US as well as the country in which we live. This is complex, costly, and burdensome. Other US regulations cause difficulties as we try to open bank accounts, access retirement funds, and make financial investments because of the extent of US bank regulation, which now goes around the world. Can we count on you to work with us and support tax reforms that provide relief for Americans abroad?
Yes, I think that this is an important issue. And frankly, you know, up until recently, it wasn't one that I knew that much about. I actually did not realize. I'm a law professor, but I don't do tax. And so I actually didn't realize that. And so I do think that that's an important issue that we really do need to look at. I do support the commission, you know, and would sign on to establish that commission to study this issue further and see what can we do that makes this easier, right? I mean, I am very practical. For a law professor, I'm extremely practical. and so, you know, I do want us to solve those problems to avoid unnecessary regulation and burdensome paperwork and, you know, all of those things. And I can imagine that it's already so difficult for Americans living abroad to navigate. How do you open a bank account? How do you get funding for a business or to do, you know, any of the things that you want to do? I mean, all of that is hard enough to navigate and understand in a new country. And so we don't want to complicate that and make Americans' lives more difficult. So I do think that we need to establish this commission and to study that further, see what steps can be taken to kind of avoid unnecessarily duplicative type tax laws and requirements and filing, you know, requirements, and see what we can do on that to make that easier.
Well, that is music to our ears. Everyone in this room, I may point out. Now, Carol Kuffler, my colleague who is an Iowa voter, is just going to mention one other aspect of this. Carol, do you want to unmute? Maybe not. Maybe she's not. Oh, there.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm here. Give me
Good,
1 second.
Carol, go
I'll get
ahead.
my
Yeah.
questions up.
Oh,
Okay, yes. I'll read this verbatim so that I get my point across clearly. I vote in the 3rd district, but I definitely vote every single election. So I'm right behind you. The Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus exists to provide a forum for discussion of the issues that are important to overseas Americans, as we've discussed, including citizenship, census, voting, banking access, and taxation. Given our congresspeople will represent constituents inside the district as well as abroad, I think you've expressed that you would be, but would you be willing to join the Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus once elected to stay in the loop on these ongoing issues?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you bet. You bet.
Well, Christina, thank you so much. Carol, that was great to have another Iowa voter on our call. And now I'll hand back to Angela for the next question.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Our next question is from Gail Fagan. Gail, do you want to turn on your video
There, okay.
and ask your
Sorry,
question?
sorry, my video, I don't have a camera on my PC, so that's not really me up there. It's a flamingo.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, my question is about the environment. Is that Iowa is like the iconic rural state we always talk about the virtues of the small family farm and everything like that. Yet in the end, farming is becoming so industrial and harmful to the water, to the people living there, and just livestock, the crops, but also businesses like food processing plants, which we saw at the start of the COVID crisis. And how can we make Iowa farm business more green and more humane? And it's especially a problem because most of the rural population tends to lean more towards the Republicans. How do we become greener in this country?
Yes, great question. And there's a lot in that with our agricultural economy, with the environment, with climate. You know, there are a lot of things going on there. So I'll say a couple of things. I could talk about this all day, but I'll say a couple of things here. So first of all, you're absolutely right. In Iowa today, we have fewer family farms than we ever have. And, you know, it's become that big agriculture had taken over a lot of the farming here. A lot of the people, you know, a lot of the land is not owned by the people who are farming it anymore. And that's very sad. You know, we also are seeing that farmers, especially family farmers, are making less on the crops they produce than they ever have. The fact is that farmers are really getting squeezed. You know, if you think about the farming operation, you know, farmers have to buy inputs like seed and fertilizer, and then they have to sell their crops to processors, whether it's meat packing or grain processing or whatever the buyers are. And what's happening is that there's a lot of real market concentration, a lack of competition in some of those markets, both on the input for fertilizer and seed side and on the processing side, on the output side. And so what that means is that profits are very, very high in those industries, and farmers are paying a lot for them, but the farmers themselves are getting way less out of their crops than they ever have. And so I think one thing that we need to do is really take a look at that market concentration, see what's happening with the lack of competition in these markets, whether that's through antitrust or other kinds of trade regulation. So we really have to look at that to make sure that our farmers are getting fair prices and paying fair prices and getting fair prices for what they produce. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that we need to do is we need to think about, you know, helping farmers be part of the solution on the environment and on climate. Going back to my first point, you know, the farmers really are not earning a very good profit on a lot of the crops that they produce. Many of them have to actually supplement their farming income with, you know, a job in town or, you know, something like that. It's much harder to make a living from farming than it ever has been before. And so what happens is that if we put a lot of regulations on them, right, if we say you have to fix water quality, you have to fix climate change, they don't often have the resources to do that. I really believe, and I've heard from a lot of them, that farmers know that we have water issues. They recognize that climate change is an issue. In fact, they are heavily hurt by climate change with the droughts that we're seeing, the extreme weather days. It's really affecting their growing season and their bottom line. They get it. The problem is that if they don't have the resources, they're not earning the profits that allow them to invest in some of the things that would help make that better. And so we have to give farmers the resources they need to do that. And then they are smart, they're adaptable. I believe that they can be part of the solution to water quality and issues like climate. They can invest in and adapt their practices. They can invest in more sustainable practices, cover crops and other things that would actually remove carbon from the atmosphere and help us become part of that solution. I'll add to that just one last piece on it, which is, I think, somewhat related to this, and that is renewable energy. Iowa is a leader in renewable energy. We get more of our electricity from renewable energy than just about renewable fuels than just about any other state. And so that is a real opportunity for us to grow even more, become even more of a national leader and grow our economy, create great jobs right here in Iowa, while also making America more energy independent. And so that is key. Now, my opponent, however, she apparently thinks that she lives in Texas, because what she does is that she takes a lot of money from big oil. She has taken nearly $60,000 from big oil in the very short time that she's been in office. And then she votes against things like renewable energy to make us more energy independent. She votes against holding the oil and gas companies accountable for corporate price gouging at the pump, even as gas prices are soaring. And so clearly she has a misunderstanding about what Iowa is and does, because Iowa is a leader in renewable fuels, not a leader in big oil. And she is championing big oil over the very things that make Iowa, Iowa. So that's a fundamental difference between her and me. I will not, favor big oil over our own people, our own companies, our own farmers. I will work to make Iowa even more of a leader in renewable energy and help our farmers and our agricultural economy at the same time.
Thank you so much, Christina. We will do everything we can to get out the Iowa vote for you, because you have some great ideas and you seem to have a good understanding of everything. So thank you so much for coming today.
You bet. Thank you so much. And I'll just mention, Amy, I like your point about using choice in campaign slogans. I'm going to think about that. I like it. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Next, Jane, would you like to introduce Liz Mathis for us, please?
I would. I'd love to introduce Liz. Christina, one vote. I'll be voting for you. So that's one from me. Yes, I'm delighted to introduce another longtime colleague, Liz Mathis. Liz is a native Iowan. She grew up on a farm in eastern Iowa, paid for college by detasseling corn and mowing cemetery. So an Iowa girl. She went on to graduate from the University of Iowa Journalism School. Yay, that's where I used to work. With an additional degree in broadcasting and film. A lot of you will probably know Liz as a longtime broadcast journalist in Eastern Iowa. She started out in local radio, worked as a reporter, worked hard to earn her way up. Eventually, she served as the first female anchor, presenter, as we say in the UK, of the evening news at KWWL TV, and then moved on to a similar role, evening news anchor at KCRG in the late 90s. Since 2011, Liz has served as an Iowa State Senator. She represents Cedar Rapids and much of the surrounding area. Currently is ranking member of the Human Resources and Agricultural Appropriations Committee, and she serves on multiple other committees in the state Senate as well: Education, Commerce, Economic Growth, and Veterans, I think among others. In addition to her Senate role, Liz also is Chief Community Officer for Four Oaks, which is a child welfare and juvenile justice agency so devoted to helping children who need help. She's a resident of Hiawatha, a wife and mother, as is Christina. I neglected to mention that, and a long-term advocate of affordable healthcare for all Iowans. So Liz, great to see you again, and thanks for being here, and we'll turn it over to you.
Oh, nice to see everybody. And it was good to hear, Christina speak as well. And I see that Ryan's on the call as well. All of us have been working really hard out here. It's, I announced last July 27th, so it's been a year and a couple of months since I've been on the trail. So just to give you a brief description of what it's like to run a campaign like this, we've made almost 25,000 donor calls. We have been to almost 13 county fairs. I think probably walked in 13 parades. We've been all over the 22 county area, visiting every county, not only visiting with Democrats, but making sure that we have been circulating and meeting no party voters and also Republicans. So when we go to firefighters' steak fries and fish fries, and what we're good for is pancake breakfasts and things like that, and a lot of farmers markets. We try to circulate and just meet everyone, because it's going to take quite a few votes, not just Democratic votes, to win. We have an advantage. Just a few thousand people Democrats are registered to vote more than Republicans. It's just a few thousand advantage. And so with hundreds of thousands of people voting, in this district, we want to make sure that we get every last vote. So just for those of you, I'm not sure how many are on here who are in the new 2nd district, just to let you know, it's Lynn County, Dubuque County, Black Hawk, Winneshiek, where Luther College is. We included now in this new district, Mason City, which is Cerro Gordo, Chickasaw and Floyd, and Hardin, Butler, and Grundy. So those are the new 6 counties. And we lost Jones and Jackson and Iowa and Marshall. I had a woman call me from Marshall County. She was crying. She said, "Oh my God, I'm out of your district. I'm in the 4th district, for 10 years. And so Ryan, I think I'm going to give you her name. She needs some to be consuled or something, but I know that, our team is working really hard to make sure that we're going to win. We were in Mason City yesterday because Mason City doesn't know us. And so knocking on doors and finding out that a lot of people don't know they're in a new district. And there are a lot of women that wanted to talk about reproductive rights. But before I launch into that, I wanted to let you know that Jane was right. Thank you, Jane, for that nice introduction. Jane knows that I grew up on a farm, and my mom and dad were World War II vets. My dad started farming after World War II, like many people did. He worked with my uncle, and my uncle owned the farm. So, or his great uncle, my great uncle, his uncle owned the farm. My mom was a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. And then, with the call for the Cadet Corps, nurses in World War II, she joined the Cadet Corps, became a nurse. And when when the war ended, she started working as the town doctor's nurse. And so she delivered a lot of babies and mended broken bones and all of that. But while I was growing up, I saw my mom and dad lead quite a bit. My dad was on the school board, and he was also on the County Conservation Commission. So he was the first no-till farmer in Clinton County in 1972. So very progressive. My mom and dad fought over this because, of course, the 40 acres that he used as a test plot were a mess. And it took about 2 years before he could tame everything down. But he got a lot of questions. A lot of people drove down our lane to our house because they wanted to know what he was doing. And so that's something that kind of dovetails from, I think, what Christina was talking about. There was a question asked about agriculture. And really, farmers like to see things happen. They like to see it. They like someone else to try it. It's a field day, or you're going to watch, what kind of hybrid worked that year, or, how do you buy certain kinds of equipment? It's something that farmers like to do. They like to see it in action and see if it works. And if they're convinced, they will do it. So I got to experience that, as a farm kid. I detasseled corn. Two of my crews were kids from the juvenile detention center, boys from the juvenile detention center. And my my claim to fame early on was to try to keep them from fighting over the lunch hour. Someone said it was probably pretty good practice for the Iowa State Senate when I got in. So, it was a lot of fighting there. So after I detasseled corn and mowed the cemetery, as Jane said, I went off to the University of Iowa and got my journalism degree. Best degree ever. I was able to, do a lot with it, a lot of communications, a lot of journalism. And so for 30 years, then I traveled Northeast Iowa. In fact, just the other day, I was reminded, as we were visiting Norman Borlaug's boyhood home, that I got to interview him in the kitchen of his home. And I also got to experience going to Nicaragua shortly after Iran-Contra, where people were not friendly to Americans. In fact, I was spit on in the market, but that we were able to take some of Norman Borlaug's seed corn and start new fields for Nicaraguan farmers who had lost all of their crops during a hurricane. I think it was Hurricane Mitch that hit there many years ago. So I've gotten to experience things like that. Talk to people about their health care. So 30 years of stories and 30 years of traveling in Northeast Iowa has helped me acquire great experience to legislate then at the Iowa State Senate. So I joined the Iowa State Senate in a special election back in 2011 for the single Democratic majority seat. So it was the 26th seat. My state senator was resigning and she had one term left. And so I jumped in and we won handily in a purple district. Then I turned around and I won by that next year for the new recarve of the districts. I won by 16% in a purple district. And in 16, when we had the Trump wipeout, I won by, again, 12 percentage points in a purple district. And then in 2020, I was uncontested. So we're taking that same model. What we do, I've registered a lot of voters in my Senate district. My Senate district represents 10% of the total congressional district, second congressional district. So I know that I have support here at home, and I'm going to continue to do that. We have watched my opponent take some really bad votes, and I'll just whip through those so that we have time for Q&A. She's voted against the January 6th committee, the formation of the committee. that was probably the most motivation for me to run against her. She voted against the Violence Against Women. She voted against the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. She voted against the infrastructure bill that will pay for 4,000 endangered bridges, fixing these endangered bridges in Iowa, build roads, expand broadband, and a lot of work around agriculture and USDA and clean climate projects. So she voted against those, but she took credit for it back home 2 weeks later. So a lot of people have been asking her about that. She voted against the Inflation Reduction Act. She voted against the contraceptives bill. She voted against the PACT bill, which is the most comprehensive medical bill for veterans since Agent Orange in Vietnam. It's about burn pits. So you can see why the reasons why I'm running. I'm running because we can do better. We can do a lot better. So with that, I would encourage questions, and I'd love to answer yours.
Right. Thank you so much, Liz. Our first question is from Naomi Ages in Norway.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And you touched on this during your remarks. So anything you'd like to expand on, but don't feel like we don't understand your position on this. So my question is about abortion, and we know that it's a winning issue for Democrats, and we want our candidates to run on protecting it, and we want them to win because they ran on protecting it. So what lessons are you taking from the recent ballot initiative in Kansas, and how can you apply that to this race in Iowa? And then how can Democrats abroad help get the word out to voters motivated by the issue? And how can we reach voters who might not typically support Democrats with this issue in this moment?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me tell you that Kansas was a surprise for us all. What they were expecting, about 400,000 voters, and 900,000 showed up, and for that ballot issue. So we can learn a lot from that. We can learn a lot from Pat Ryan in New York. We can learn a lot from the Alaska election. But I think for me as a state senator, and I was chair of Health and Human Services from 2012 until 16. And there were many, many Republican bills, the 6-week ban, a 15-week ban, a heartbeat bill. I mean, they would send those over to me, and I would promptly put them on my desk and just ignore them. And so when 16 came and there was a wipeout, people said, what's happening? Well, it's about the majority. It's about the majority. If you don't have the majority, if you don't have the votes, you can't stop the bad bills. And that's what we're seeing now. Or you can't stop the confirmations. So the issues are around some of those things. On a bright note, I was knocking on doors on Sunday afternoon. I knocked on a no party door. So what we're doing is starting with a universe that's out here. Think of it as a circle. So we're going to infrequent no party and infrequent Democrats. And then we keep contacting them as we get to election day. And so I said, I see that you're no party. How do you think that you'll vote in the election? Do you think you'll vote for Republicans and Democrats? And she said, no, straight Democratic ticket. And I said, why is that? And she said, GOP overreach. And I think for many voters that I've talked with about this in this cycle, that seems to be the prevalent issue, along with inflation and the economy and Medicare and Social Security. So Ron Johnson and Rick Scott have both talked about sunsetting federal programs, and Medicare and Social Security, they've talked about privatizing that the GOP has for years. And I've seen what privatization can do, especially for our Medicaid program in Iowa. So I think reproductive rights will be prominent, I predict, in the Iowa elections. I knocked on doors in Dubuque, and 21 of 31 doors, women wanted to talk about reproductive rights in the Archdiocese of the Catholic Church in our area. It's in Dubuque. So while I've been a state senator, I've knocked on thousands of doors. And now I can count on one hand how many times people wanted to talk about reproductive rights over this last 10-year period. But in this cycle, with the overturning of Roe, people are wide awake. They have awakened. and not just women, but we have a lot of Democratic men and no party men and a lot of Republican men, surprisingly, at the doors are talking about it as well and listening to their wives talk to me about it at the doors, which is interesting. So that's one thing. We know that it's going to be an issue. And you're asking how you can help get the vote out. I would say where you are, it's really phone banking, and it's, and maybe it's taking the friends in your list, your contact list, and starting with 10 and just asking those 10 to take a look at me as a candidate, if they're in my district, or Christina or Cindy or Ryan, and making sure that you tell those 10 that were solid candidates and ask those 10 to call 10 people. So it just becomes more of a, comes from friendship, and then it expands as, a political point. So I think the most, sometimes it's just, it's contact. It's contact with people and one-on-one, and telling them, how important this is. And expanding the majority in the U.S. House is all part of that. I'm a red to blue flip by the DCCC, so they select a few campaigns and candidates that are doing well in not only budgetary issues, but also in campaign strategy. And my campaign manager is brilliant. She has laid out a great plan for us, and we've followed it. You just have to keep with the plan, and that's what we're doing, and it's working. We're tied up with her on an internal poll, 44-44. I hope that answered your questions, Naomi.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right, our next question is from Carol Moore.
Liz, thank you so much for being with us today. And I love your relationship strategy. We are phone banking around the world. So, with 200,000 members, we're not going to reach them all, but we're really trying hard. So we're together on that. Meanwhile, I'm going to talk about the issue, and you may have heard if you were listening, the issue that affects all Americans abroad. What is the iniquitous tax situation we're in? The United States is the only developed country in the world that requires overseas citizens to file a tax return at home. This means that every year we have to file 2 tax returns, not just in the US, but obviously in this country where we live. It's complex, costly, and burdensome. There are other US regulations that cause difficulties as well, which my colleague Carol will mention. But I'm going to ask, can we count on you to work with us to support tax reform, which we've been doing, Democrats abroad has been doing for a number of years, and that can provide relief for Americans living abroad?
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this, Carol. Have you looked at HR 6057, which is called Tax Simplification for Americans Abroad Act? Now, I don't know if Liz, that's along the lines.
That's one of the, it is one that we were in congressional offices last summer.
Great.
Yes, so you know what we're talking about.
Yes,
thank you.
yes.
That's great.
Well, yeah,
yes.
It directs the IRS, for those of you that may not, it directs the IRS to make available really a new tax form for certain individuals living abroad, and the form is going to allow you to demonstrate non-residence and declare foreign income and your foreign taxes paid, and a U.S. source of retirement and pensions and Social Security benefits, all of that. So I'm glad that you like that, because I like that too. I think that makes sense. Great.
And I'm going to let Carol, I'm not an Iowa voter, but Carol is. So Carol, if you want to talk about a couple of the other issues that we also face living abroad.
Certainly. So thank you so much for joining us today. HR 6057 is good. Let me vehemently state it does not go 10% as far as what we need it to go, right? What we truly need is residency-based taxation, which would require us to, pay in the U.S. on assets we have in the U.S., if we have any at all, and then pay in our country of residence what we, on things we have there. But there would not be the huge gouging into our pockets of our non-American spouses, correct? My husband has to declare everything. Our spouses would like to bury us tax season every year because of the horrible nature of the filing and the unbelievable complication and the invasion of privacy, quite frankly. So anyway, I had to tack that on to what Carol was saying, because it's so awful. I mean, I can't even begin to describe how since 2010, our lives have just been ruined. Not to mention, we can't get bank accounts, we can't have pension funds, we can't do any of the things that responsible citizens are asked to do to plan for our financial futures, right?
Mhm.
I had to cash in a pension fund. I can't get a bank account. I can't invest in mutual funds. I can't do any of these things because the US has reporting requirements of entities abroad, and they just don't want to touch us because it's not worth it to them, right?
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
those countries ask that of US entities, you can only imagine what the response would be, right? It's invasive, it's unfair, and it's really uncalled for because most of us are just regular people, right? Okay.
Yeah, and as Carol knows, tragically, many Americans can't afford to get the advice, and millions do not file, Liz. And and some do not know, but many know they are in violation. Okay, Carol, we better stop and get on to the next question, but thank
Well,
you so
there
much.
is, there
Go
are a
ahead,
couple
I
more.
should allow you to answer. Apologies.
Well, there are a couple more bills that I wondered. It's HR 5799. So it's the Overseas Americans Financial Access Act. And then another one, HR 5800, which is Commission on Americans Living Abroad Act.
Right.
Now, what do you think about those two? Tell me what you would want developed more on that, or is it fully developed?
We're very supportive, Liz, and we have helped get these things through the Americans Abroad Caucus, which, I say Carolyn Maloney has been a star to work on, but she will not be there. So we need people like you coming in to pick up the baton and move it forward. But yes, all three of those bills are very much things that Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force, and you will probably see us door knocking in Washington next week. Okay,
good.
Thank you.
Yes.
Shall I take on the other little bit then about the caucus?
Yeah, I just mentioned it, but yeah, go, Carol.
Okay, yes. Okay, so just briefly, the Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus exists to provide a forum for the discussion of the issues that are important to overseas Americans, including, citizenship, census, voting, banking access, taxation. Given that you'll represent constituents inside the district as well as abroad, will you join this? It sounds like you're very open to joining this caucus once elected. And also, how can you seriously are the most informed person that I've come in contact with on these issues. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Thank you so much for taking the time to inform yourself and to take us into account, because there are 9 million of us, right?
Yes.
So how, just briefly, what else can we be doing apart from the door knocking in Congress to open the eyes to the fact that there are so many of us abroad, and how can we help engage you in the issues that affect us?
As American citizens, you can still donate as well. And so, that's one of those things. I'd say, one-on-one conversations, relationships, things like that really can move a voter. I mean, if you know that your friends are all voting Democratic ticket, but reassure them that you've talked to us and, our races in Iowa look good. I think we've had a tough time here in Iowa where we've had some losses when we thought we were going to have some gains. This year, we have such great opportunity to move forward, and we can win our races and we can change the course for Democrats in Iowa. We can really do it this year. So I think just expressing that to even the Democrats that are going to be voting Democratic, but even if there are some people on the margins that know they might be no party, or they're just, I hear from donors sometimes, they'll say, what are you going to do there in Iowa? How are you going to jumpstart things? Reassure them that we are jumpstarting things and that we are, working very hard to take back, these seats in Congress. So I think it's the message It seems like your reach is really good. Just clean up your lists and make sure that you got the right phone numbers, that you're calling people, and good emails, and follow up that way.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. We wish you all the success in the world, and we'll do everything we can to make sure our overseas voters are voting in the election.
Really appreciate it. Thank you all very much for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, next we will hear from Erin Bozek Jarvis. She's the campaign manager of Cindy Axne. Cindy couldn't join us today, but we're pleased to have her campaign manager here to tell us about the state of the race in Iowa 3. Erin?
Thank you. Yeah, just want to pass along that the Congresswoman, sorry, she isn't able to join. As I relayed to Carol, they are back in session in Washington after about 5 weeks away, and today's their first full day back. So as you can imagine, she's having a hectic day voting in DC. So I'm happy to be here to just give a quick update on the campaign. Congresswoman Axne is currently the only federal Democrat representing Iowa in the halls of Congress. So we're really looking forward to getting her some great colleagues and Liz and Christina. But until that happens, she has to be the voice of 10 representatives to make sure that she gets what she needs for Iowa. Just a little race update. We are running against a Republican named Zach Nunn, who during his Republican primary raised his hand during a debate and said that he supported outlawing abortion, no exceptions. So that's really the kind of extreme policies we're up against in the 3rd district. And we've seen a lot of outside groups come in and support his campaign with contributions and TV ads and all of the like. So we're really making sure that we get the Congresswoman's message out there on the doors, on phones, on TV, and in mailboxes. It's quite a big district. It's 21 counties. We travel to every corner of the district, hosting town halls and public events to make sure that we get the Congresswoman in front of as many voters as possible, not only so she can introduce herself and ask for their vote, but also so she can take their experiences and their issues directly to Washington. So it's been a busy few months on the campaign and 55 days to go. So really looking forward to once again re-electing the Congresswoman. If you do have any questions for Cindy, please feel free to email us. You can email Cindy at cindyaxneforcongress.com, or you can check out our website, cindyaxneforcongress.com.
Thank you so much, Erin. Again, we will do everything we can to get out our Iowa voters and make sure that the overseas vote counts. Don't want those 6 votes to hang anybody up again like they did the last time. Thank you so much for coming. All right. Next, we'll hear from Ryan Melton, and he'll be introduced by Gail Fagan. Gail?
Yes, hello. My name is Gail Fagan. I'm a member of Democrats Abroad in Italy. I'm deputy chair of the global IT team, and I'm a very proud Iowa voter. I voted District 3. But I'm honored to say, I'm honored to say a few words about Ryan Melton, the candidate for the 4th district, a seat that was too long held by the horrible, horrible Steve King. I think a lot of us on this call, I realize that we can identify with a lot of things in Ryan's background, which have helped shape his values. He was raised in a family with modest means, the first in his family to attend college. He had a full scholarship to study at the Iowa State University, and he graduated with a bachelor's degree in history and political science. And he also worked as a journalist for the Iowa State Daily. He then earned a master's degree in US history at the Kansas University and focused on post-Reconstruction, civil rights, and environmental history. He's worked, and then after that, he worked for the last 13 years at Nationwide, managing high-performing teams of insurance professionals. He's passionate about the environment and has been a vegan for almost 2 decades. Like wild, the things that give him his factors for being a personal choice to be a vegan are land management, sustainability, water quality, and the sanctity of life. He also understands that not everybody can make the same choices he has. And he always laughs that one pleasure is he gets together with his friends and some are grilling burgers made from Iowa beef, and then he's up there with his burger made from Iowa soy. And he and his wife Laura are raising 2 children. We know that you support accessible healthcare, competition and sustainability in agriculture, racial equality, and infrastructure funding for Iowa. We are interested in hearing how you will advance these and other issues for the constituents of Iowa 4. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Sorry, hear me now?
Yes.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thanks so much, everyone, for the invite. Really appreciate it. Currently taking a little break from working from home here in Story County in Nevada. Currently run a team of 19 insurance professionals at a Fortune 100 company based in Des Moines. From Omaha, Nebraska originally, but as the intro advised, have been living in central Iowa for over 2 decades now, starting with my time at Iowa State University. The first question I usually get pertains to why I decided to run. So JD Scholten has run for this seat the last 2 times, but he announced mid last year he wasn't going to pursue a third attempt. Initially, my wife and I were, our interest was piqued not because we thought that I'd be running, but we were just interested to see who else would run in JD's place. But by mid-January of this year, it became pretty clear that there was not going to be a Democrat on the ballot to oppose Congressman Feenstra in November. And so there was a dinner conversation between my wife and I, and very straightforward. You know, I guess one of us is running for Congress then, because someone's got to do it. And she said, yeah, you should probably take this one. You handle BS a lot better than I do. And so here I am. I've been asked to run for public office from time to time, but with my full-time job, with my wife and kids, I've always had, plenty of justifications not to. But this time felt different, not just because there was a real risk that a Democrat was not going to be on the ballot here in the 4th district race, but also because of January 6th. That was really a compelling motivator for me. Having a master's in U.S. history, I could talk to you all day, every day about the many things that we've accomplished through our representative democracy. And not naive enough to say that our representative democracy is perfect. There's certainly much to fix about it, but when we lose that mechanism, we lose the ability to fight for those who need that good fight fought on their behalf the most. And to me, I think this issue, the anti-democracy push we're seeing right now, is really amplified by who is representing us in Washington, D.C. here in the 4th district. So my opponent was asked just a couple days after the January 6th insurrection what his thoughts were as to the people that stormed the Capitol that day. And he called them wonderful people that got carried away on a day that over 100 officers were hurt and people died. Voted against the impeachment of Donald Trump for his involvement in that day. Voted against the creation of the January 6th committee. That committee has really shown us how directly involved former President Trump was in what happened that day. So you would hope that your representative in DC would see that and would adjust accordingly, but he hasn't. He received Donald Trump's endorsement in early June and has not rescinded or revoked that endorsement. He instead has bragged about it. And we know at this point that an acceptance of Donald Trump's endorsement is a rejection of American democracy. And so I don't feel as his constituent, as a voter in the district, that my representative really represents the core basic values that we should all be advocating for, being American citizens, whether domestically or abroad. But of course, I'm running my campaign through the prism of what the needs are here in the 4th district. And a lot of those needs are very similar to what Liz and Christina mentioned. My primary animating concern, once you dig into the 4th district issue specifically, are the massive population declines that we've been seeing for decades now, that really leave our schools, our businesses, our hospitals, and our communities very vulnerable and on shaky ground for the future. There are a lot of root causes that are driving our people away, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what those are. It takes people elected to public office that care to solve for them. And so a lot of those issues have already come up today. Affordable and accessible childcare and healthcare. We have hundreds of thousands of Iowans that live in childcare deserts, where they find it very difficult to obtain affordable and accessible childcare. The state legislature in Des Moines, which is run primarily by Republicans, their answer to this childcare worker retention crisis and availability crisis is deregulation, having younger people watch kids on their own, unsupervised, which I've heard from a number of parents that it makes them feel really uneasy, and they've actually started to pull their kids out from those daycares because of those concerns. Also, raising the cap as far as the number of kids that each child care worker can be responsible for. So we already are seeing a lot of child care workers leave the industry because of underpay and overwork. That's the last thing we should be doing. That's going to amplify the crisis. Beyond that, my opponent has stated that he wants to make the Trump tax cuts permanent. In my opinion, that was essentially a robbery of the US Treasury. And his friend, Governor Reynolds, has recently signed a flat tax bill. And if you talk to any expert in childcare, they'll tell you that hamstringing our tax base makes it much harder for us to provide the funding to solve for these issues. Affordable and accessible healthcare is another issue here in the 4th District. We have a lot of counties in my district without a single OBGYN, for example. We have a number of rural hospitals either closing or at risk of closure. And so that's why I'm a big proponent of a single payer universal healthcare plan like Medicare for All, to create more access, to remove obstacles to access, and to encourage doctors and mental health professionals to open more practices in rural Iowa. They say that would be a really big help. Also talked a bit about college affordability and the fact that one of the big disincentives from our professionals, our mental health experts, our doctors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of the disincentives that's making it less likely that they'll plant operations in rural Iowa is they have massive college debt, massive grad school debt. And so a lot of what animates where they set up a practice is what will help them pay their student loan bill. And unfortunately in rural Iowa, there's a lot of struggle there as far as patient base. So, but if you're a young person and you're fortunate enough to overcome those obstacles with no help from who's representing you in DC or Des Moines, and you find your child care, you find your health care, you then have to find housing. And that's been a real struggle here in the 4th District as well. Rents are going up across the board, and recent college graduates are being priced out of the market, considering the college loan debt that they have, and the increase in housing costs. I've rejected corporate PAC money from day one. My opponent takes an awful lot of it. So he's certainly not going to address the issue of the fact that we're seeing a lot of corporations coming in, a lot of investors coming in and buying mass swaths of properties and flipping them to high rent locations, taking away even more power from homeowners and from renters. So it's a big problem. And then you're going to have to find a job. And it was really jarring to me driving across the district earlier this year, gathering the signatures to get on the primary ballot, how many very successful corporations are advertising full-time jobs for $10, $11 an hour. I talked to you earlier about how, we have a lot of childcare affordability and accessibility issues in the district. Common Good Iowa actually put together a lot of data around what the living wage is right now in Iowa earlier this year. And they found that for a 2-parent household with 1 kid, the living wage to take care of basic expenses is now roughly in the low 20s per hour. So the math just simply doesn't work. Our young people want to live here. They want to build families here. But if you have a 2-parent household and one of the parents has to stay home and watch the kid, and you have the other worker that only has an option of a $10 to $12 an hour full-time job, the math is not going to work for them and they're going to leave. So on top of that, a lot of young people have told me that they want to stay and they wish they could take advantage of the burgeoning work from home economy that's starting to grow And my employer Nationwide is one example of where we're hiring beyond brick and mortar now. But for rural communities to take advantage of that, you need robust broadband. And my opponent voted against Build Back Better, the infrastructure bill, a number of things that would have helped in that space. So our young people, again, tell me they want to stay, but they feel like they don't have the career opportunity, and providing for more robust broadband in rural Iowa would really help with that too. So I'm an advocate for that, creating those kinds of opportunities that have more enticing career tracks, and obviously more enticing pay for our young people to stay. On top of that, my opponent is literally one of the lowest rated members of Congress by the AFL-CIO for his anti-worker voting record, voted against the PRO Act last year, which would turn back the tide on this real attack and resultant reduction in collective bargaining that a lot of our workers have, especially, public employees have really seen a big reduction in their collective bargaining power. I've been endorsed by the AFL-CIO, so I'm going to work not only to boost the minimum wage, get it closer to that living wage, but also to fight for collective bargaining rights. And that public employee piece segues me into public school. Public education has been a big priority here in the 4th District. The governor has been on this big campaign to convince us that we should allow her to pull public money out of public schools to fund private school vouchers. There's not a lot of private schools in the 4th District, and there's certainly no guarantee that if your public school closes, considering all the other economic issues I've been detailing, that a private school is just going to pop up in its place. People realize that, and they know that if your school closes in your rural community, it's much less likely that community will thrive long term. And if you're a young person looking for a place in rural Iowa to build your family, if you feel that your public school is on shaky ground and you face a real risk that your kid's going to be on a school bus for 30, 45, or 60 minutes a day going to the next town over, that's yet another thing that's driving our young people away. And in turn, with all these disincentives that are driving our young people away and leaving our viability as a district on shaky ground, you in turn see a lot of parents and grandparents leave to be closer to their kids and grandkids as well. So I'm a big advocate of public schools. I really believe in public schools as a great equalizer for our kids. I grew up in poverty in Omaha, Nebraska. College was not really a feasible, practical option for me because my family just didn't have experience with it. But it took a public school teacher to pull me aside, see the potential I had. And she really built a future for me that included college as a practical, achievable option. We have so many kids in the 4th District going to school, dealing with poverty at home, dealing with life issues at home, who are not in an ideal learning mindset. We need to pay our public school teachers commensurate with the value they bring so they can see those opportunities and build more futures for our kids where otherwise those futures would not be built. So the NEA releasing their recent number that we're facing a 300,000 teacher shortage, really jarring. And so we need to stop vilifying our public school teachers as some politicians have been doing, and we need to pay them commensurate with the value they bring. And I'll be a big supporter of that. But let's say as a young person, you overcome all those obstacles. Well, at this point, Steve King was brought up, right? So the Iowa Republican Party would love us to think that Randy Feenstra is not Steve King. But when you look at his voting record, it's the same voting record. The only difference is that Steve King said the worst stuff out loud and Congressman Feenstra tries to fly under the radar. This really comes to bear. This really becomes obvious when you look at the next piece of what we need to keep our young people here, and in turn to keep a lot of our parents and grandparents here so that we stem the tide on this population decline issue. And that's what we deserve, which is to live in communities where we feel safe, respected, and not threatened for who we are. And again, Congressman Feenstra has had opportunities to take votes that defend those that are most vulnerable, and he's refused to do so. When it comes to people of color, he voted against the Crown Act, which helps us push back against discrimination they face in the workplace. He voted against interracial marriage, and he voted against a bill that would lead to the removal of Confederate statues from the Capitol grounds. When it comes to LGBTQ plus people in our district, in our state, he voted against the Equality Act, which would help us protect them from discrimination they face, and he voted against marriage equality. When it comes to women in our district, he voted against the Violence Against Women Act. He voted against a contraceptives bill in the House. And he's been absolutely giddy about the downfall of Roe, but he doesn't want to stop there. He, like other Republican opponents for the House in Iowa, he's pushing for a federal abortion ban with no exception as well. And I've had numerous conversations with young people across the district who are telling me that this election is going to be make or break for them as far as whether they leave the district or stay. I've had a number of people, not just young people, but their parents, their grandparents. A very common thread I'm seeing is that a lot of people now are really terrified about this reproductive rights turn and are literally making plans to never get pregnant. Because, once you lose control over your reproductive rights, you lose control over your future. And I've had a number of people tell me that, there are plenty of people that go through pregnancy and end up dealing with miscarriage. My wife dealt with a miscarriage that did not come to fruition on its own. We needed medical help. And a lot of people are very terrified that if they face that kind of situation with a pregnancy complication, that they don't have control. They don't have access to the options they'll need to overcome and to get through that. Okay. So they're really terrified, amplified by who's representing them here in the 4th District in DC. Gun safety legislation. My opponent has voted against every gun safety bill that's come across his desk. When asked why, he says he doesn't want to inconvenience gun owners. I've talked to Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Independents, gun owners across political spectrum. They've all told me the same thing. They've all told me they're willing to be what typically would be slightly inconvenienced, if at all. They're willing to go through that if it means their kids are safer. And the fact that my wife and I just had a conversation before my son started preschool last week about concerns about his safety in school when it comes to gun safety. And these conversations are happening across the district, state, and country. So the fact that my opponent is voting against the most common sense gun safety legislation and bragging about his A rating from the NRA instead is really jarring and scaring people. And finally, climate change. My opponent has written an op-ed in support of carbon capture pipelines, which is a really big issue here in Northwest Iowa. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with it, but essentially up to 80% of people here in Northwest Iowa are opposed to these carbon capture pipelines, through which eminent domain would be used to take land away from landowners so that corporations can benefit by laying these carbon capture pipelines that would take off some of the carbon residue from ethanol refinery, even though science has shown that this is a failed technology over and over and over again. And also, we don't have the emergency management personnel in rural Iowa to deal with a carbon capture fracture. That would really imperil public well-being. And the second op-ed that really shows that my opponent is really married to the status quo when it comes to environmental concerns, whereas I recognize the scientific consensus that climate change is an existential threat, and we need to be taking bold action on that. A recent op-ed my opponent wrote said that, look, even if the Democrats get their way, and even if everyone's driving an electric vehicle, and there's no escaping from the fact that our electricity grid is fueled by coal and oil, and essentially just trying to set this unavoidable obstacle that fossil fuel is going to be our future. If you look at that op-ed, if you did a control F on that op-ed, if you read that op-ed word for word, there's not a single mention of wind and solar energy, not a single mention. And Iowa is one of the most robust producers of wind energy around the world. And so it's not a surprise, though, this has come up already today, that a lot of the donors that fund his campaign are big oil and big ethanol. So, but anyway, so I'm the candidate that wants to do his part to care about the long-term viability and sustainability of the communities in our district. And my opponent really does seem like the candidate that is in it to get his while he can before the whole thing falls apart. So I hope you join me at meltonforiowa.com and Melton for Iowa on my socials. But thank you so much for the time and invite. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I just wanted to tell you that in Dutch, Feenstra means a person that lives in a bog. So
I'm going to write that.
No. It's not a great name. We wish you all the success in the world. We have time for one question. Gail, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. I think I think the question dovetails with a lot with the things you were talking about, like the rural flight, from all generations. and the economy in your district. It's about the environment. Like, how can we, because the challenge I think in Iowa is that the rural population is probably more conservative than the Democrats. And we still have this image in our head of the small family farm and things like that, but it's not true. Like, it's agribusiness. And how can we change things around without and still be able to get elected?
Yeah, so this has been a really interesting conversation piece in the 4th district. So my opponent has refused to debate me. He's the only candidate at my level or higher that's refused to debate. So he saw that he was getting some heat for this. So what he decided to do was to agree to do a closed forum without press that wasn't a debate, which was in front of the Iowa Corn Growers Association. He felt that that was going to be friendly turf for him. And so ethanol came up. Now, the Iowa Corn Growers Association, corporate interests, of course, have a big incentive to expand corn ethanol. But we know, and this actually came up in one of the questions in the chat earlier, there's more and more science that makes it really clear to us that corn ethanol production is not the silver bullet when it comes to climate change mitigation, that we have to be more diversified. We have to be more adaptable in addressing our climate change future. And so I was asked at the Corn Growers Forum, do you support a broad expansion of corn ethanol? And I said, no. We should in no way dismantle corn ethanol, but we need to be more diversified. In Iowa, we're married to corn and soy, and that's leaving our farmers in a very vulnerable position where we're going to see more and more corn ethanol markets close over time as more auto vehicle manufacturers electrify their fleet. And what I've found is that if you look at the corporate interest messaging, they want us to think that corn ethanol is the be all end all and that everyone is locked up in support of it. But when you actually talk to the farmers on the ground who are actually tilling the land every day, those who are often more conservative, they actually are not really big fans of this idea that corn ethanol is this big monolith we should all support, because they see the writing on the wall. They know that not only are the markets going to be reducing more and more and more, but they also see the massive topsoil erosion we're seeing, and in turn, the massive waterway pollution that comes along with that. And more of them know that they're seeing productivity declines because of climate change issues. And they know that corn ethanol does not really deliver as far as greenhouse gas emission. And so as far as your question, I think there's actually more hope in rural Iowa and more sentiment that would suggest that a lot of our farmers on the ground are not locked into the status quo. As they see these productivity declines and the downstream residual impacts from corn ethanol expansion, they want more politicians that are more willing to talk about the nuance there and say, yes, we appreciate that in the short and midterm. Corn ethanol markets have given us financial viability, but that we know that's not going to be around very long. And so politicians need to be real about saying, hey, we need to start building for a future where we're more diversified, we're not soiling our waterways, we're not losing our topsoil at unsustainable rates. And so I got a great response from that, actually, from a lot of voters out there. And so I just continue to try to speak truth to power on that, to not be afraid to speak to the nuance, and to not just be stuck in the short-term thinking mindset, because a lot of our farmers want to hand down that farm to the next generation, and they need politicians that are mindful about the mid and long term as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. We wish you the best of success, and we're going to do whatever we can to help you to get out the vote for Iowa voters abroad and at home if we can too. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. This has been actually really fascinating as a person who's not from Iowa, all the different issues that have come up. So I hope that everyone will take the time to check out the candidates' websites, which I'll just drop in the chat here in just a second. And of course, please remember, if you haven't requested your absentee ballot yet, time is really running out. And Iowa is a mail ballot state, so you need to get your ballot early in time for ballot day, which is the 24th, and be able to mail it back Also, if you have some extra time and you really want to help us get out the vote, it would be really great if you would consider helping call our members by helping us do phone banking. It's really simple. We only call our members. We don't call people outside of our membership. And of course, please go to votefromabroad.org. Thank you so much to June Owens from the Iowa Democratic Party, Vice Chair. Thank you to Christina Bohannon, Iowa 1, and Senator Liz Mathis, Iowa 2, and Representative Cindy Axne and her campaign manager, Aaron, in Iowa 3, and of course to Ryan Melton in Iowa 4. We wish you all the best of luck, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you win, because as many of you have said, our democracy is on the line, and voting is the most important thing you can do this year. Yeah, go Iowa, go vote blue. Everybody have a great evening.